Hello, and welcome to episode number 217 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am joined today by none other than the Green Tank Mark.
Hey, yeah, you're talking about friends, but you've only got one friend today.
It is the dynamic duo. It is the peanut butter and jelly. It is
right.
the
natural partnership.
The natural partnership that everyone has been waiting for. It's Prime Rib and weird brother of Prime Rib, Kellen and Mark.
No Nealon.
No Nealon. Today on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to give you an update on games that we have gotten rid of recently. That's a frequent request. A very frequent request to hear the games that have left our collection, quick hot takes on why they have left the building. And recently we had Dice Tower West, and I gave Mark a lot of games. I think I brought 40 or 50, and 3 of them were for the convention, and 47 were for Mark to get. Yeah, Mark, you deal with this, and just tell me how much money I'm getting.
Just cut me the check at the end.
And in fact, we haven't spoken in a few days, and the only thing I said to him this morning was, how much money do I have I made?
That's true. I'm keeping a running tally. I've given Kellen the update, but I still got my people working on it. So
this podcast was a money-making venture from the start.
That's right. That was our number one goal.
But before we do that, we're going to talk about some games. I am going to start with a look at a Reiner Knizia card game, Circus Flohcati. I've practiced pronouncing Flohcati many times.
You practice pronouncing Flohcati, but not pronouncing the word pronouncing. So that's okay.
Mark? Are you Prime Rib, or are you the weird brother of Prime Rib? No one likes
that's an Arrested Development joke, right?
No. All of my jokes are original. And after I do that, Mark is going to take us back to Trainland, like he likes to do with Imperial Steam by Capstone Games. And then we're going to do a quick talk about game that I have been trying to get them to play for many years, and we finally got to play it at Dice Tower West. We'll leave that in suspense. Circus Flohcati is a Reiner Knizia card game. Yes, in fact, the only true and living Dr. Reiner Knizia. This is a push your luck set collecting game where there are 10 different suits, which is a lot, right? Not often does a game have 10 suits.
Yeah, you usually expect 4. That's the standard, you know? Not only is this double, but it's double plus another 50%. So this
double
is crazy.
Plus 2. It's so many suits. The version that I have is, no surprise, a Japanese version, because why get it in America when you could import it and have to look up the rule book? And the 10 suits are sort of the best things that you might find on a Japanese walkabout or a picnic or sort of a perfect day in Japan. But there are other versions that are more circus themed, as the title would suggest, where you were trying to collect different like bug circus workers, like a trapeze artist or a tamer, a lion tamer. And that one has much weirder art.
Yes.
Much weirder, Mark. Much weirder.
It's like anthropomorphic fleas or something like that?
It's very uncomfortable to look at, so everyone should not do that.
Yeah.
But the game is quite good. In Circus Flohcati, you are simply choosing a card from the face-up array or top decking and adding cards to the array until you get a card you want, and then you take it, and your turn's over. Except you can bust. And you bust by drawing a card of the same suit as anything visible in the market. Your turn ends if you do that. So it's a constant pressure of, do I want this card enough? That card is not good enough, but maybe I'll push my luck. At the very end of the game, everyone scores 1 value per each suit, meaning that you have 12 cards in your hand. Only the 10 unique suits are going to score their highest card, and the 2 that were repeat suits, those score nothing. Literally nothing. And values go to 7, so a 7 card is highly desirable. Highly desirable, a 7 card in Circus Flohcati. There are some special power cards that allow you to steal cards from other players, a la, what is it? Guess Who? No, that's a different game. Go Fish, where you're like, Mark, I know you have the koi pond. Give me your koi pond.
Wait, that's how Go Fish works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that,
it's been a long time since I played Go Fish, to be honest.
Or like
so maybe that is how it works.
Crazy Eights or whatever. Like
sure.
Like Red Rover, send me your 7.
Red 5 over. Yeah, right.
I think that's how those games work. I don't know.
Maybe.
I thought we were the professionals. So
that's true.
And if they have that card, they have to give it to you. If they have multiple of that suit, they actually get to choose. So that's a little bit of the defense against that card. In addition to that, if you want, you can score triplets, which is 3 of any number from different suits. And that allows you to sort of use the 0 cards that kind of do nothing. And so the game is very tense and very quick. And I think the rules overhead is low. I played Circus Flohcati probably 4 or 5 times at Dice Tower West. I always like to come with a game like this where we don't know what to do. We're waiting on Mark. Mark is somewhere in the ether, and we just play a game of Circus Flohcati at PAX Unplugged. It was trendy for me, another Reiner Knizia Japanese card game. And today, Circus Flohcati. I thought it was very good. Mark, what did you think of Circus Flohcati?
I also liked it quite a bit. I wonder, though, and maybe this is rehashing something we shouldn't rehash, but why do you love Circus Flohcati and why were you down on Loco? To me, they feel like the same.
Oh no!
Okay, we don't have to prosecute Loco here. But for me, they feel like similar games. Again, not to bring it back up, but games that sort of replace Uno, games that sort of fit the bill of the type of game you could teach a family member or a friend or whomever who isn't necessarily into hobby board games, but does like the mass market type of card game. It sort of feels like that. Super simple to teach, but with interesting decisions given the weight and the sort of time frame.
Yeah, I think for whatever reason, Loco had this element of playing at 2 or 3 and really card counting everything.
Sure.
And Circus Flohcati, you're playing 5 players, and it's a much more
random situation.
Breezy affair. In Loco, you get down to the end, and I do think one player has more information than the other player and is very much controlling the tempo.
Sure.
And I consider that kind of a degenerate game state. Circus Flohcati also, Mark, as a point of note, was re-implemented as a Star Wars Attack of the Clones card game.
Right. Yeah, you were just telling me about this. So big points for that.
You hadn't considered that because anyone who really loves that theme cannot get it on BGG because there are no copies available in America. There are 2 internationally. No, I thought this was really good, and I would encourage people to try it. I don't think it's going to be cracking my top 50 next year, but it is extremely solid, and it is not leaving my collection, unlike the 30 or 40 games that we'll be talking about during the main episode. I don't want to belabor the point, though I am concerned that my Circus Flohcati section will be small compared to Mark's enormous train monstrosity. Yeah. Maybe I should have brought 3 games to my upfront.
Well, we could talk about Loco again if you want. Make this sort of
that's
package
fine.
Deal. I know we said people shouldn't, but it's one of those things where it's like a car accident where you don't want to look, but you can't help yourself. If you're listening to this and you're near a computer, you do sort of have to look at the Circus Flohcati, the latest American edition with the art from Grail Games. These anthropomorphic fleas, it's just crazy. It's just, the art is crazy.
I don't know. We maybe need a disclaimer.
Like a ballerina flea? Like, when are you going to see that? It's very off-putting, but it's fascinating at the same time. Anyhow,
Mark, we're trying to record an episode here, and Mark's eyes are just darting all across his monitor right now.
Right.
I'm uncomfortable.
Anyhow, back to Capstone. Capstone is a publisher whose games I more or less am always interested in.
How did Juicy Fruits work out for you?
I have not played Juicy Fruit, so maybe that's why I'm still interested in them. But they've been on a little bit of a streak lately. Of course, you've got Arc Nova, which is burning up the charts, both on BGG and with prominent game reviewers, who I will not mention.
What does it take to become prominent, by the way?
What does it take to become prominent?
Yeah.
In the board gaming sphere? I don't know, like 5 listeners?
Are we prominent? I don't think we've made it yet.
I think
we're close.
We're close. We're close.
We need everyone to tell your friends. We're hoping to be prominent. So if we go from 3 listeners to 5, we've made it.
Yeah, we can retire finally. So they got Arc Nova. To a lesser extent, they've got a couple games recently that we reviewed and played, Boone Lake and Coffee Traders. And also they got Corrosion and Rift Force. Rift Force I know we talked about earlier, and Corrosion we've yet to play, but they've got a string of games there. So I got a chance to play another of their latest titles, Imperial Steam, designed by Alexander Humer. His other big title is Lignum, whose second edition was one of Capstone's early releases, all the way back in 2017. Lignum was a super dry game about chopping and drying wood. See, I told you it was dry. And transporting it for sale. That game stands out for me for 2 big reasons. Well, in addition to the fact that it's about drying wood, which is remarkable in and of itself. First, it had that mechanism that I love where you can go as far down a path as you want to select an action you want to take at the cost of foregoing all the spots you passed, therefore leaving them for your opponents to take. It's a mechanism that I always enjoy seeing. It's also in Francis Drake and in Paris. I love that action. But second, and more importantly, when talking about Imperial Steam, Lignum is the game that springs to mind when I think about games that have a deceptively difficult rule set to explain. The rules for Lignum don't seem, or at least it didn't seem to me, too bad when I read them, but for whatever reason, I always have a hard time getting them across whenever I teach the game. It's a weird situation with Lignum. Imperial Steam, I'm happy to say, is in many ways the exact opposite in that respect, at least for me. Looking at the rules of Imperial Steam feels daunting, but I've now taught it a couple times, and it's quite, albeit relatively easy to teach, I think. I mention this not only to have a comparison to Lignum, but also because I do really enjoy how simple, again, relatively simple, it is to teach this quite heavy economic route builder that is Imperial Steam. In Imperial Steam, you're a railroad baron in mid-1800s Austria, so that is a theme I know Kellen loves. Big into mid-1800s
Yeah,
Austria.
it was sounding really similar to every game I've ever played, but then you said Austria.
Yeah.
And I said, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, now it's unique.
Yeah, listeners can't see this, but behind Kellen on his wall is a big Austrian flag, so he's a big into Austrian culture. So what you're doing is you're in 1800s Austria, and you are a railroad baron trying to build the most profitable railroad around the nation by buying trains, by building routes, by making deliveries, and even selling a little bit of stock. So a lot of things that you expect from train genre games, although this is certainly not an 18XX or anything like that. The way the game works in general is that you've got a couple of workers that you'll place on one of 11 worker placement spots to either build rail or hire company workers or buy goods or take on contracts or buy trains or raise funds. So it sounds like a lot, and it is. There is a lot to consider in this game, especially given the fact that the resources of all kinds, be it the resources that you use to build your rail or deliver to cities, or the money that you use to buy the resources or hire workers, is quite tight. And in that way, there is a sort of commonality with Lignum. Both games do require some amount of forward planning. I think you would call Lignum and Imperial Steam games where thinking ahead is quite important. However, the way the actual worker placement spots function is very straightforward. While there is no blocking, both in the worker placement spots or on the boards itself when you're building rails, there are some interesting ways that those aspects are tightened up. When it comes to worker placement spots, you can go to a spot you've previously been to, but each time you repeat the same action in a round, you lose what's called influence, which is another resource, a valuable resource in the game that sort of like generally gives you more options. The more influence you have, the more things you can sort of do, or the more places you can sort of go. And so this is a game that requires forward planning, and if it was too constrictive in terms of having spots blocked off by your opponents, that might devolve the game into a lot of AP where you're saying, okay, I really need the spot to be open, and if it's not, then I've got to replan my entire thing. So the spots are open, and you know you can always go to them, but there is a cost that is inherent that you sort of know about. And I think that's an interesting way to keep it from being too simple to do whatever you want, but not so constrictive that it really freezes up the game.
Is this game prettier in person than it looks on the internet?
Okay, so I've been recently looking into some of the reviews of Imperial Steam, and I do see this thing about people saying it doesn't look very nice. I don't know. It seems really nice to me. The components, I think, are of solid quality. It may be a thing where it's just my sort of thing and not other people's thing, so maybe that's something to consider and put out there. But I think it looks fine.
Spreadsheet at the bottom of the board.
Well, I mean, that's
like
really
an
a
actual
track more than a spreadsheet. Unless you're talking about some aspect that I'm not familiar with. There's a spot where you are keeping track of your influence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see. There's a lot. Right?
Yeah, there is a lot.
Your player boards, the main board.
Yeah, and I will say that while I think it's an easy game to teach, yeah, there are a bunch of sideboards, both individual sideboards and game board sideboards. While I think it's a fairly straightforward game to teach, again, relatively, it is a bear to set up, and that is, I think, a strike against it for sure.
You could just have your butler set it up for you.
Yeah, no, I was actually on the road the second time I taught this. When I first taught it, I did have the butler set up initially, but the second time I was at somebody else's house. They for some reason didn't have a butler, so that was a problem. But I mean, I assume all our listeners have butlers. Have your butler by all means set this game up in advance. That would help things out quite a bit. However, back to the game just briefly, I think that the most interesting thing is in the game how simple stock selling action works. So you have a little sideboard, as we mentioned, where you can manipulate your stock price and build a pool of investors. The higher your stock price, the more money you get from selling stock, obviously, but the harder it is to find investors willing to pay the higher cost of your stock. So if you have your stock very valuable, you get a lot of money, and money is super, super hard to get in this game, but the harder it is to convince investors to pay that price. Here's the really, really interesting bit about the stock selling. No matter where you sell your stock at, whether it's at the start of the game for $40 a share, which is the lowest price, or near the end if you've built it up to $240 each share, each investor you sell to will cost you 10% of your final money at the end of the game, which is 10% of your final score. So if you sell 5 shares, you'll raise a bunch of much, much needed cash, but you've just cost yourself half of your game end score. So that's an interesting aspect to it. There's a real
tension. Is that like a loan, though, basically?
I mean, it is a loan with a variable repayment based on how well you end up doing.
Yeah. See, like, when you start talking about variable interest rates and stuff, they usually put that at the bottom in fine print because no one gives a about it.
But this is a selling point for this game, so that's the world that I live in. One last thing, finally, there's an interesting bit where the only way that you lure these investors is by taking on contracts. These contracts can give you a bunch of cash if you accomplish them, but if you are not able to accomplish them, you lose that amount of money, sort of ticket to ride style, where if you accomplish a ticket, you get the points. If you don't, you lose those points. So this is potentially a huge swing from positive cash to negative cash at the end of the game. However, those contracts are only applicable if someone builds a rail from the starting city of Wien to the destination city of Trieste. So if no one builds that route, all the contracts are null. They don't count. But if anybody builds the route, not only are the contracts active and valid, but if you have contracts and you haven't built to Trieste, you have to pay the person who did for the right to use their rail. So it's this balancing act throughout the game about, okay, if you don't think anybody's going to make it to Trieste, you take on these contracts to build a big pool of investors to sell a bunch of stock for a lot of money without the risk of these contracts going badly. Then you see your opponents suddenly make a push for Trieste and you start to freak out. And so there's that sort of tension in the game as well.
All right, let's play a little mini game.
Let's do it.
It's called This or That.
Yep, perfect. Let's do it. Can't wait.
All right. Lignum or Imperial Steam?
Imperial Steam.
Okay. City of the Big Shoulders or Imperial Steam?
This is tougher. I would say City of the Big Shoulders, but I did really like Imperial Steam. But go ahead, give me another edition of that.
It's like, I just want to know where this sits, right? Because, you know, you said the thing about variable interest rates. You said the thing about luring investors.
I said the thing about Austria, mid-1800s.
About Austria, yeah, all of that. And I'm trying to get a sense, because I like heavy games, right? I like economic games.
Yeah.
But you're using some words that I love, City of the Big Shoulders, for example. But you're using some words here that make me wonder if this has so much like forward planning,
right?
That sort of premise of if you sell to investors, you're having your score like by each.
Yeah,
that's pretty brutal.
So I will say that specific part about trying to figure out if you should sell is the part that is hardest to figure out in terms of like, okay, that's where a little bit of the math comes in, where you say, okay, I think I'm going to have this much money at the end of the game. Is it worth it to sell? And I would say in general, it's not worth it to sell stock at a very low price unless you really need the money, in which case it can be super valuable. And it's always worth it to sell stock at the end of the game if you've raised your stock price, as a rule of thumb. So I think that's the general rule of thumb. If you play with players who are going to insist on calculating where exactly they are, you're going to have a bad time, I think, unless you're the type of person and you want that type of game. But I agree it is a scary part of the game in general, or something that may turn people off. I don't think in practice it's really too bad. As far as if it's a game that you'll like, it is for planning, but there is a lot of tactical thinking, again, depending on what your opponents are doing. I see a lot of complaints about this game about like it being a multiplayer solitaire, and it is insofar as you can't absolutely be blocked from most things. There are some things you will be, but you do have to react to what your opponents are doing. There is that. There is a big city where you really want to get there first, and if you see somebody start making a move, you want to make a move there yourself, and you do sort of need to look at your opponent's boards. Do they have the resources to do what I don't want them to do? There is that type of thing. So it's not combative, but I would not call it multiplayer solitaire either. I think that you will like it, not love it, just because I think it's a straightforward game to explain. I don't feel like there's a lot of edge cases, and it's not
Right.
it's not like bogged down in the rules. But I don't think it's interesting enough in the way that you like brass heavy economic sort of thing, or
Well,
have
right.
big shoulders. Yeah.
And that was my question, right? Because like it sounds like brass is simpler than this, or
Yeah, I think so. I think they play in
Yeah.
the same area, but I don't think this is as good as brass. But I think you will like it. I don't think you will necessarily want to play it a second time. But I think you will
Right.
like it. I think you will.
yeah,
like it.
it's like economic games, but for board gamers is where I'm at, and you're
Yeah.
at the like economic games for 18xx, you know, and
Right.
like sort of that
Sure.
twist up versus
Yeah,
the
yeah.
twist down. So I'd be very excited to try this one, but it sounds like you are setting it up or your butler, but I think your butler's name is Mark.
Yeah, no, which has caused me a lot of problems in the past. A lot of like sitcom-esque
Confusion.
shenanigans. Yeah, like I get a
Yeah.
phone call, they overhear
Yeah.
something about Mark, and I think it's me, but it's actually
Right.
the butler. But
and then your girlfriend accidentally kisses the wrong Mark.
right, yeah, because like he's turned
It's a
away, so he
mishap.
can see her hair, and yeah, there's a whole thing. Yeah, it's funny. Anyhow, that is Imperial Steam by Alexander Humer and Capstone Games.
After we played one game of Winds of Gale Crest, a reprint of Libertalia by Palamori, we decided to bust out one of his greatest games and one of my top 50 games of all time, which is Dogs of War. And Dogs of War is what a War of Whispers wishes it was, which is to say a game where you are having hidden allegiances towards certain factions, and you represent a dog of war that doesn't care and just wants to fight for whatever is going to get you the most. You are placing, for whatever reason, giant busts with big hats on them onto worker placement spots, but the worker placement spots are in a battle. So there's two cards, and Team Red is fighting Team White, and when you play onto the Team White card, you are advancing their objective for the round, but also getting yourself a little bonus right there. And everyone starts the game with a little allegiance towards a certain color, but you are investing and getting more allegiance to certain colors, and at the end of the game, you multiply out your allegiance to a faction by how far up the track, which is based on how many battles they've won and how much they've won the battles. Mark, you got to play your first 4-player game of Dogs of War. What did you think of it?
I really liked it. I think tug of war games can sometimes not really feel too exciting. That wasn't the case with Dogs of War. I really enjoyed it. It's another game that is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot of edge cases. That we hit the ground running from the get-go. You did say that our game sort of degenerated a little bit in the final rounds where things were a little stalematey. So it might not have been the top grade experience that I was hoping for. And I think a big problem with our play for me was the fact that I just been hyping this up in my own head for so long. But given the fact that, as you said, it wasn't maybe the most exciting ending, and the fact that I'd hyped it up so much, I think it does speak to how good the game is in the fact that I really did enjoy our play of it, and I would be very excited to play it again. I found the trying to figure out where, because it's very important to try to figure out who's allied with what factions. I mean, you can glean that if you're paying attention as the game goes by, because one of the worker placement spots will give you influence in factions. So, you see Christina going to the gain 3 influence in the blue faction, and you keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, well, Christina is pushing for blue, so, maybe I push against blue whenever I can. But then the game did have moments where somebody is with a faction, at least a little bit, and then they play against the faction, and you wonder, like, why did Neelan do that? I know Neelan is in white, and now he's going against the white faction. Did he do that just because he wanted that worker placement spot, or does he have a color that I don't realize?
Hidden
or
motives.
Yeah, exactly. And there are enough interesting counterplays with cards where usually in the game, if you start playing for a faction, you have to only play for that side of the battle. But there's a card that allows you to break ranks and play against yourself, basically. And that sort of action is a very exciting potential part of the game. And you're always sort of on edge as to what the other players are doing, especially when they seem to be working against the motives you think they have.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the greats. Definitely encourage people to check out and try a game of Dogs of War. I did the thing that makes me feel really dumb in hindsight, which is that I was very powerful in terms of impacting what was happening on the board. And I was like, oh, I'm a surety. I'm going to win this. I'm having the most effect on the board state. But dumb Neelan was profiting off of me doing that because he was invested in yellow right along with me. And so I spent too much capital, so to speak, on being the one that was controlling the board, and then that did not work its way out to the winner.
Which is me.
Yeah, but if we look at it a different way, I was pretty close.
That's true. And if it wasn't for Dumb Nealon, you would have definitely won, I think.
If it wasn't for Dumb Nealon, which is something I can finally say, get that off my chest. If it wasn't for Dumb Nealon.
Yeah.
No, but what a good game. Definitely suggest checking out the designer variants. If you have not played with those are on Board Game Geek that make the competition a little tighter, make the game just a smidgen more cutthroat in a way that I find perfect. And that was Dogs of War from Cool Mini or Not, a game in desperate need of a reprint. Desperate. Yeah, we don't need hats. We just need Dogs of War. And we don't need miniatures. Like, there are a lot of miniatures in this game. Mark, people always ask us, what is the best way that they can help the show? Mark, what is the answer?
Send me money directly.
That is not the answer. Just how many people have you tricked with that answer before?
More than I want to disclose here, but
yes,
it is certainly my answer, but it's probably not the answer.
Yes, what is the answer? That's
the answer is spreading the word. Spreading the word, and the best way to spread the word in a global sense, I mean, you can always tell your gaming friends, we love that. That is great. Yes. However, another way to do it on a more global scale would be to write us a review. I think that's what you're getting at.
That is what I'm getting at. One of the best ways you can help us is to leave a review, whether that's on Spotify, where you can star us now, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, where you can leave a written review, or anywhere else that allows you to do so. It really helps with visibility as people are searching for the term board game podcast. It gets us to the top. And when we like a review, we definitely read it on the air, so that's fun. If you want to shout out to your favorite tank, which we all know is the blue tank, I agree. My favorite tank. And beyond that, you can join our Patreon, where we have a bonus episode every single month. That is at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon and patreon.com/boardgamebarrage. We use that money to upgrade our equipment, and we use that money to advertise the podcast and invest in things like art and merch and et cetera, et cetera.
And we also use that money for pizza parties for listeners when we have local conventions, as Mike Delicious mentioned on the last episode of Sporadically Bored. He was here to witness that.
Yeah, and I wasn't there for the day 2 of this when all of a sudden you're charging my credit card and it's just like pizza party shows up on my card, and I say, has my card been stolen? But no, it was you using the card without permission, Mark.
That's right. I was in Vegas. I was drunk with power. We had patrons come over. I needed to get them pizza. Stat.
Needed pizza. All right, let us move on to our featured topic, which today is about games that we have recently gotten rid of. We try to do this occasionally because there is a lot of coverage of the latest hotness. There is a lot of coverage of new games and positive impressions of games, but we want to keep ourselves honest. I want to keep my collection lean. I don't think Mark does. Actually, I know that Mark does now that I've seen his house.
I do want to keep my collection lean. I've got rid of a bunch of games. I just have a big turnover. That's my thing.
This is relatively speaking, similar to how light Imperial Steam is, relatively speaking, compared to Circus Flohcati.
That's right.
Relatively speaking. That could be the name of the episode. Well, is that what you said? Now I'm worried you said something.
I said everything's relative.
Okay.
So we have two titles. Listener, vote for... No, that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
All right, Mark. So what are we going to do? We're going to round robin this? I say one, you say one, I say one, you say one?
Sure. I mean, I've got buckets of games in terms of like why I got rid of games. So,
you bucketed them?
I bucketed
did prep
them.
work.
You don't see these buckets? I got buckets back here.
I didn't see. I said no prep work specifically on the call sheet for this episode.
Yeah. I missed this call sheet. I usually get our call sheets, but this is one call sheet that I didn't get. Why don't you start us off? You start us off, and then I'll start with the first bucket that I've got.
Okay, how about we do buckets of 3?
Okay, great.
And these buckets have no... Well, you can do your buckets. I'll do buckets of 3. Okay. The first game that I recently got rid of was Camel Up Off Season. This is the extended universe of Camel Up. Mark, have you played Camel Up Off Season?
I have played it.
Oh, not with us. Well,
That's
I know
how
you
prefer to play games.
Yeah, that's fair. Camel Up Off-Season has literally nothing to do with Camel Up except that there are camels in it and shares some of the art. It is a weird-ish, auction-y type game where you are collecting fruits and collecting spices and putting them in different camels who have different aptitudes for different spices and fruits, and they do.
They do.
You are sort of trying to make sets without busting, essentially, and then you bust and you have to get rid of camels. The production is lavish. The gameplay is fine. Mark, do you concur?
I do concur with that, yeah. I think it's a nice auction set collection game, but maybe not worth the lavish production, perhaps.
The amount of people who saw this game in my bag and wanted to play Camel Up and were disappointed to find out that there was an extended Camel Up universe is more than 2.
Yes.
I swear to God.
I only showed this game to about 3 people, and more than 2 of them thought it was another version of Camel Up or Camel Up itself or an expansion for Camel Up, and were some level disappointed when they found out that it was, in fact, part of the extended Camel Up universe instead.
Yep. Moving on to my second game, which is going to not be pronounced right, Ciub. Ciub. This is a Thomas Lehman game, one of our favorite designers of all time, who has made Race for the Galaxy. I think that Ciub is Roll for the Galaxy for babies. Babies first, Roll for the Galaxy. And let me tell you, babies should not be playing Roll for the Galaxy. There are games that, for whatever reason, I just don't find interesting enough to even cover in the upfront on the show. Ciub is one of them. Neelan and I played a game. It was fine. It has a lot of dice. It has a lot of custom dice. And there were turns that were fun where you were trying to hit certain criteria to turn in all your dice. You were turning in dice for different color dice. You were re-rolling all the dice. Just one that did not do enough for me amidst a lot of other dice rolling games. The third game that I got rid of was 10. This is a more recent game that we did cover on the show where every roll has something to do with 10, which is some statistical oddity, which is why they named the game 10. I find 10 to be totally great and, well, totally fine, but with too many rules to make it great. It does not live up to the no thanks. It does not live up to the for sale. It does not live up to the biblios, and yet it has more rules than all of them. It is a fine game and one that a lot of people were playing. I don't imagine it will stick around, but that's just my guess. I could be wrong. It also has really pretty art, graphic style, and those are the first 3 games that I got rid of. Mark, what do you got for us?
So my first bucket is going to be my biggest bucket, but I assure you that the buckets get smaller from here. But this bucket is the just not that great game bucket. This is just games that were fine, but they're either better alternatives or just middling. So I'll go from least well-known probably to best. I'm a fan of word games and even games where you have to like sort of write something out. So Poetry Slam was a game that I was interested in playing. It's a game where you score points based on little mini poems you can write. It's hard to get poetry games to the table, unsurprisingly, and this game isn't probably even worth the effort to get people to play a poetry game, so Poetry Slam was out. Visitor in Blackwood Grove is a deduction game that we all played at Gen Con a couple years ago. It's fine. I just think other games do sort of deduction better. It's a team deduction game that is, again, fine, but just didn't have any impulse to really get back out on the table. A couple games that we've talked about on the show, Mr. Cabbagehead is a game that not only has very off-putting art, much like Circus Flohcati's Anthropomorphic Fleas, but I'm dabbling in solo games, and I just think Mr. Cabbagehead is not super great solo game, at least as far as I'm concerned. Bosk is a game that feels a bit like Photosynthesis or Azul. It's got that sort of like simple, pretty production, but just in my few plays of it, just wasn't exciting enough to have me decide to keep it. And finally, Castell, which is a game that I got primarily because Matthew Jude, I think it's his favorite game or top 10 game for him. So I'm always interested to play games that people who I respect enjoy. And I did enjoy Castell. It's got an interesting spatial aspect to it where you are in Spain as part of the, I think, Catalonian festivals where there are these pyramids made of men where people are stacked on top of each other. So there's this aspect where you're trying to build a pyramid of people, and they have different numbers and stuff. So there's this little interesting side aspect of it, the spatial aspect of it, which I thought was interesting, but just not maybe interesting enough to make me want to hang on to it. So Castell was another in the good but bucket for me.
Castell, the artwork on that cover is weird too.
Yeah,
weird artwork bucket.
It's got a nice sort of pastel look, which I generally like in games. It was a tough one to sort of let go because I always in the back of my mind thought that the next play would be the one that really pushed me over the edge, but just never got there for me.
I didn't peg you as a pastel man.
I like pastels. Pastels are nice. They're calming, you know? A nice pastel blue, a nice pastel pink, purple. It's a nice shade.
All right. The next 3 games that I am now trying to quickly put into buckets are all Oink games, and there is nothing in my life that I won't cut. That is what I want the listeners to know. The first Oink game that I cut was called Ninja Catfoot and the Covert Action. This is a game where you, no lie, I am not lying right now when I say you strap your phone to your arm, your hand, and you are playing a game where you are trying to pick up pieces in the middle quickly, and your phone is making sure that you don't move too much. And if you move too much, it beeps at you, and then you have to cool down for a few seconds before you can start stacking again. It is a race to stack the most pieces, sort of in ascending order. This game is super great if you have an iPhone, because the one Android player, Neelan, couldn't. It was so much more sensitive. He was so upset. He wanted to play it so bad, but if only he would have spent twice as much money, he could have an iPhone, and then he could have played Ninja Catfoot in the Covert Action.
Neelan just had his hand down on the table, completely still, and it was just still picking up that he was moving. He was so frustrated. It was hilarious.
It is supposed to work in iOS and Android by visiting a web URL. The reason that I don't have this, I am not lying right now when I say this, is because we discovered that the game has a solo mode, and Mike Delicio, Mike Delicious, a.k.a. the Fandango Take, promised me that this would be a Dice Tower video of him teaching and playing the solo mode for Ninja Catfoot and the Covert Action. I could not turn down the opportunity. I could not to have this solo game shared with the world. That is Ninja Catfoot and the Covert Action. 2 other Oink games that I got rid of, In a Grove and Dokojong. Dokojong I like more than In a Grove, but they both sit in this place where they're kind of procedural, kind of fun, kind of have other games that I prefer, like Durian and Fafnir, respectively. Fine games. I have a little bit turned on Oink games. We've talked about that before. They never fit back in the box. They're adorable. I read somewhere someone say that they're style over substance, which I do not believe at all. But I will say that the boxes are hindering their ability to make games that fit inside them, and that is a bigger problem than I initially anticipated. 3 more games that I got rid of. Mark, what do you got for me?
Well, let me ask you real quick before we move on from Oink. How do you feel about the double-sized boxes, like the 9 Tiles Panic? Do you think that you think they should just go to like regular box? Like, what do you think they should do?
So there's a couple of problems, okay? And this is going to trigger anyone, and it triggers me, so I'm making fun of myself. You know, they have started selling some of them at Target in like triple size boxes.
Right.
And they're kind of ugly. Don't get those.
Right.
They, in America, occasionally have them in the double wide and then in the single wide. So you can actually get, I believe, either 9 Tiles or 9 Tiles Panic in a single wide in certain regions, but not in all regions. And so it starts getting hard to be a collector of Oink, something I previously thought I was and have now eschewed as I have evolved into a man. I would say that it sucks. It's like the Aaliyah line, you know, of all the games of like Puerto Rico, and like you see them all numbered together. That's cool.
Yeah.
Like, I saw someone at either Dice Tower West or PAX Unplugged who played through all of them.
I think it was Dice
in
Tower
one
West.
convention.
Yeah.
And I just love that, you know, and like having them all on your shelf. I totally get it. So I would prefer that they stick to the single box size, but just be more realistic about the components that they're willing to put in. You know, in the case of Covert Ninja and the Catfoot, whatever, there's literally like wristbands and then things to strap your phone to the wristbands.
Right.
You know, and then all the pieces, you know, and a string. It's like, is there a cell phone hiding in here for this game?
Right, yeah. It would be a bummer to see Oink move from the small box to something more standard.
I agree. I don't know, though. It's sort of like, on the other end, you have like board game tables that has that square box that they put a bunch of stuff in.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I got rid of GPS later on in the list. Gotcha. But I also don't like that size either. So it's like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I kind of wish all board games were the same size. That would be nice. That would be lovely.
Did you see the person who took all the boxes out of their entire collection and made them all like the uniform white boxes with the cover pasted on front?
Even when they were like, no thanks, and suddenly it was in like a Ticket to Ride size box or like close to it?
Right. I think you may want all games to be the same size box, which I can get behind, but that seemed a step too far.
It is egregious.
All right, so my next bucket is going to be sort of a synergy of a couple of different buckets. So there's a big bucket containing mini buckets. So one of the mini buckets is games that I got rid of because I just think I'm going to always prefer the BGA implementation, and that game is Yokohama primarily.
Oh my gosh.
I like Yokohama, but I just don't think I could really ever want to play it again in the physical space when all those little pieces, all those little bits are now handled by BGA really well, and I don't see myself.
What about our planned trip to Yokohama?
That's true. I mean, I would reacquire it before we left for Yokohama, or you had a copy, so I don't even need to reacquire it, so we're all set. So why are you even asking me that?
Synergy.
The next bucket is going to contain 2 games, and this is a bucket of games that I just
Wait, that bucket had 1 game in it?
Yeah, it was a single bucket.
You love buckets over
here.
here.
You know what game could go in that bucket maybe soon is Castles of Burgundy, as much as I hate to say it.
Oh, wow. You're going to anger some Feld
I know.
fanboys.
I've played more Castles of Burgundy in the last couple of weeks than I ever have just because of the BGA implementation. But the next bucket is a 2-game bucket, so it's a little bigger. Not a huge bucket, but 2-game bucket. This bucket is games that were aspirational, but I'm not going to play. So those games were Oath, which is a game that we played. I got a copy of it myself, but just realized I don't really have any really interest in it. As interesting as it is, and as much as I like Cole Worley's take on game design, I just did not have the interest in doing and I know it's not necessarily a campaign, it's not a legacy, it's somewhere in between, but just no fire for Oath for me to play it. So that one went. As did Feudum, which is a game that I remember when it was on Kickstarter a couple years back, I had some level of interest in it, but I heard it was just a sprawling mess, like this just huge thing. And I've heard now from people I play games with that it's actually not so bad, but I figure I'm just going to play one of their copies. If you have played Feudum, I'd be interested in hearing what your takes on it are, because it's one that occupies this weird space in my brain about what it actually is and how well it plays. And finally, the last bucket is another 1-game bucket. We're back to the 1-game bucket, tiny bucket. And this bucket only has a game that I think got replaced by another game. So I recently got a chance to finally play a Kellen favorite, Lords of Vegas.
Whoa.
I loved it. I absolutely loved Lords of Vegas. Had a great time with it. And I think it officially kicks out a game that has been dropping into Steam for me for a while. But I think it completely replaces Chinatown. I think everything you want in Chinatown, you get in Lords of Vegas, but with more fun. Our game of Lords of Vegas had a little bit of a stalematey sort of issue at the end where one player could have taken the lead at the very end, but it was only one other player and it required a certain color of card to get pulled. But Chinatown has the same problem, whereas I think Lords of Vegas, you wouldn't always have that problem. I think in Chinatown, you do always have that problem because Chinatown is way more mathy, way more everything's on the table. There's not really much randomness to play around with. It's very calculating. In Chinatown, I always wanted to like. I just never enjoyed it. It was just too mathy. Lords of Vegas, I had a great time. Exciting. Everything I wanted from Chinatown, but done as well as I think I was hoping it was going to be done in Chinatown. So
this is like one of those ones that you should have waited for me because you knew that it was one of my favorites and then you didn't. What happened?
I know. You were in Vegas. We were in Vegas together. We could have played Lords of Vegas.
In Vegas.
That was my mistake. That was totally my mistake.
Okay.
All right. You know what? I'm tired of these buckets.
No.
Buckets.
What? What?
We're buckets.
You just. Now you have like 7 more buckets than me, but we're done with the buckets?
I have too many small buckets.
Okay.
I'm dumping the buckets. I have, as you know, the list of your games that you got.
Wait,
rid of.
what? Oh, you do have the list.
I do. I literally have not only the list, but I have the games. I'm staring at the list, the list of games and the games themselves. They're on my floor, taking up space.
Okay.
So we're going to rapid fire, get this thing over with. I'm going to go through your games. You're just going to give me a quick sentence about why you got rid of them. Let's do it. Ready? Here
rapid fire.
Yeah. Starting with a tough one, because I don't know why. I just played this again, and I enjoyed it. I don't know why you want to get rid of it, but Scapegoat.
Yes.
Scapegoat.
Oh, Scapegoat. It is a one-trick goat.
It's one that you played. You played it a ton of times, right?
Yeah, I've played it over 10 times easily. Yeah. It's good for what it is. It's great for people who don't like social deduction, who are a little bit afraid of that. But it always plays out the same.
Right. Okay, so the next one is one I've actually never heard of, Bequest. Why'd you get rid of Bequest? What is Bequest even?
Yeah, Bequest is a supervillain themed game. It is a new release from WizKids. It uses a sort of I split, you choose mechanism where everyone drafts 5 cards and then puts like 2 and 3 on one side or 4 and 1 on one side. It is way overproduced, but it's very fine for like sort of a baby's first drafting. I just would never play it.
All right. So, well, while we're on the topic of WizKids, I think we need to talk about why you're getting rid of Kardashev scale. Do you have any feelings about Kardashev scale, Kellen?
I am surprised no one outed me or added me. That is literally, I think, the worst game I've played in the last 10 years. Like the worst published game. I've played prototypes that maybe could be considered worse. I'd rather play rock, paper, scissors, and I'd rather play nothing. I'd rather play with myself.
We'll clip that, add that to the end. Beez, spelled B-E-E-Z.
Yeah, abstract games that are pretty, but sort of just ultimately super abstract. I busted this out one more time after the episode, and just I don't like abstract for abstract's sake. It's gotta pop for me in that land.
Speaking of lands, what about Llamaland?
Yeah, the setup was a little arduous. It was cute. I don't know. It just didn't do enough for me. It wasn't interesting enough. I'd rather play something simpler, like even as small as like number 9. Or just Barren Park.
Yeah, speaking of Barren Park, I got the same vibes from Llamaland as I did from Barren Park, which is a little too much for what it is. If I want to play a light game with family, I'd rather go with something else.
But if you know anyone who likes lands or likes llamas, this is a shoo-in.
That's right. Especially people who like both. So the one I'm going to butcher is the name of Kobayakawa. I think I got that pretty good.
Oh, that actually belongs in a bucket. This one is good.
Oh, yeah, the oink bucket.
This is an oink game that if you like poker but want a game that can like facilitate more players, this is a really good one. I don't have the bros to have poker night with. Bros have never liked me, and ergo I must eschew Kobayakawa.
All right, so for the listener at home, that raises our eschew count to 2. We're going to try to get to 3 by the end of the episode, but we're currently at 2 eschews. Will we get
Why
to 3?
are you keeping track of my word choice? That's creepy.
That's what the listeners want. Okay, back to the doctor with Lost Cities, but Lost Cities rolling right.
Rolling rights are bad. Move on.
Gotcha. Rebel Knox. This is a sequel, right, to something?
Yeah, it's in the same thematic universe as Capital Lux.
Okay. Capital Lux followed up by Rebel Knox. What the hell?
It's a universe. The art is awesome. It's
Yeah.
sort of that white with beautiful, beautiful illustrations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played this once and it just didn't pop for me. I don't even remember it enough to...
A game I've never heard of, but I think is like an old folk game. Tutto? Is that an old like Italian game?
Okay. Wow. I didn't even know this was on this list. Never play Tutto.
Okay.
I cannot stress enough that you should never play Tutto.
Okay.
If you are a modern hobbyist board gamers, never play Tutto. Never go full Tutto.
Wow. Okay. I'm fascinated now. All right. Interesting. This is a game that you've talked about recently that I don't think will surprise many listeners, that you've got rid of, Time Bomb Evolution.
Yes, Time Bomb is great. Don't Mess with Cthulhu is great. Time Bomb Evolution is not. I've been working on a re-theme of Time Bomb for like a long time, an anime-focused one, and I just need to finish it. But Evolution is not an evolution. I don't believe in evolution, you could say.
That's what I've said about you quite often when people ask. Okay, a couple that I think fall in the same bucket, My City and The King's Dilemma. Those are 2 big ones I think may surprise people.
Yeah, so Neelan, for whatever reason, just said no to legacy games.
You mean
Dumb Neelan said, I don't want to play any more legacy games. No, I just can't be bothered to play legacy games. I'm very concerned about the environmental impact. You can't resell these things. I liked My City. My City is fine. The King's Dilemma is a role-playing game that's pretending to be a board game, and I have problems with that.
Okay, Seikatsu?
Seikatsu is another really good abstract game that I've played more than 10 times. Really enjoyed it. It just didn't stick around. You have the dog version, right?
I have the Pet's Life version, which I think is pleasant, but I honestly... not pleasant enough that I think I would keep it. It sort of feels to me a little bit like the whole Llamaland Beez thing, where it's fine, but it's not enough to keep. Iwari surprises me.
Yeah, I have the deluxe Kickstarter edition. I just would rather play El Grande in 10 out of 10 scenarios. And it's a big box and it's heavy, and I thought, there's probably value there when Mark trades it.
Sure. Dinner in Paris.
That was in shrink wrap. Not played it.
Okay.
Moving on.
Yeah, I actually looked into the rules of that and didn't seem super interesting. Ruination, I know one that you had high hopes for at some point.
Yeah, Ruination, we had a good first couple of games of it. I just don't have enough room in my collection for big box, fighty, dudes on a map, people on a plane, meeples on a mountain, sort of area control type games. And I just have enough other Eric Lang games that I prefer. It just wasn't going to get played.
Radlands, which is one that I may try playing a couple times before I actually move on for you because I'm interested in that one.
Yeah, I feel like I got by the Kickstarter. You do not need the deluxe version of this that comes with like a play mat. You can get the real version for like $17, and the Kickstarter was like $70.
Right.
And I found the game kind of swingy as the duelers go, where there's a lot of clearing happening. I did not find it to my taste. There are duelers that I do like. This is not a dueler that I like. A lot of people are really enjoying this one. I kept trying it with new people, but it just didn't click for me.
Whirling Witchcraft.
Yeah. No comment.
Okay. And you will hear comments from Kellen about Whirling Witchcraft. If you look back, go to our wiki at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki and find the episode where he did talk about it. So that's a little incentive for you to check that out. Hadara.
Hadara is a Seven Wonders replacement. The only problem is that I didn't like Seven Wonders to begin with.
I like Hadara. That is a game that I have and that I would keep. I do enjoy it. Power Failure. This is one we played a strategic on.
Yeah, this is strangely a sort of tableau-esque, very light tableau set collecting game with a dexterity element.
Yeah, stacking
where you're
element. Yeah.
pressing your luck sort of to try to keep stacking. What a weird combination.
Yeah, didn't really hit super well. Mystic Paths, a game that I've enjoyed, but less so, I think, with each play, honestly.
Yeah, it's sort of like if Codename said, I want to put on my robe and wizard hat. If you know, you know. Otherwise, just not as good as Codenames.
Sid Saxon, I know you're a big fan of Sid Saxon, and yet Bazaar is going.
Bazaar, I don't know if I've already talked about this. Sid Saxon, a trading game. He made a game called Bazaar. It's a trading game, and there's no trading in the game. You literally cannot trade. Sid Saxon, you are one of my favorite designers. What were you thinking? Actually, Bazaar, bizarrely enough, is basically Splendor before Splendor, but boring. It's like each game, you combine these two triangular pieces that make up all the conversions that you can do. One yellow and one green for 4 blues, and there's like 17 math equations, and then the game is literally you trading with the bank. To make more and more of these. It is not a trading game. It was a lie. I don't think it's going to confuse anyone because it's way out of print and probably will never be brought back. That is Bazaar.
Okay, let me ask you something. Okay, Bazaar, I think it's like from the 1960s. I think it's a real old game, right?
Sure.
And you said that the worst game you played in the last 5 years, the worst published game, was Kardashev Scale. Imagine a world, if you will, okay?
I'm imagining.
Where Kardashev Scale was printed in 1960. So now, if we're talking about that span of time, which is a worse game published in the last 60 years? Is it
Bazaar
Kardashev Scale or Bazaar? What is
Bazaar
worse?
is Arc Nova next to Kardashev Scale.
Okay. All right, and we're going to close this rapid fire segment out with a game that surprised me because I thought you were a big fan of this, but Blokus.
Yeah, I just have a lot of these giant, I have Gemblow, I have Ingenious. I just didn't need it, and the box is like so flimsy. It's annoying me on the shelf. Right. I like it, but don't love it. I actually purchased it for my company. Told me to make a board game list, and I put 20 games together, and they just bought them all for $900 for our office. I think they're trying to like con us into going back to the office.
Right.
So I'm now a board game consultant, so I can add that to my resume.
That's funny.
And that is going to do it for this episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. As you can see, without Neelan, we have no empathy, so we hope to get him back as soon as possible. But you have been listening to the best combination since 139. And that is going to do it. You can find us on all forms of social media at BoardGameBarrage.com. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, not TikTok, because we'll never go there.
Very true, but if you're a patron, you will soon be getting an episode, an off the record. We record an off the record after every episode. And on this one, we're going to have a little brief chat, Kellen and I, about games that we reacquired. So if you're a patron, listen up for that.
That's true. And until then, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Heart Society Music for their song What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album Wake the Queens.
Kellen, can you use a specific word when you sign us off here, please? Listeners want it.
Oh, yeah. And until next time, I eschew you all.
Goodbye.
I'd rather play rock, paper, scissors, and I'd rather play nothing. I'd rather play with myself.